Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of A Gut Feeling, another peptide episode of a peptide feeling. That's our new podcast. Episode number 5 of our pedcast, pepcast series. And today we are talking all about body composition peptides. Now, I'm going to let you guys know up front, we're not going to cover GLP-1/GLP-1 derivatives in this podcast. That's going to be a whole nother podcast all on its own. So here we're going to be talking about other peptides, because GLP-1 agonists are also peptides, but we're going to talk about other peptides that are used or spoken about for body composition. And look, to be entirely honest up front, and I do say this, sort of openly, I don't think peptides, from a body composition standpoint, I don't think peptides have anything on anabolics. And so when people come to this conversation and they're expecting peptides to do what anabolic compounds are doing, they're going to be really disappointed. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no potential use for these compounds, no utility, no benefit whatsoever, and we're going to talk about that. But right up front, I want to make it clear, these are going to do nothing compared to people who are running full anabolic cycles. So when I get clients or get people who are, asking me questions, wanting me to give them an alternative to anabolics, talking about peptides, the reality is that doesn't exist. Okay. So if that's what you're hoping for in this episode, you're not going to get it, but you are still going to get some hopefully valuable information to how these peptides could be utilized. Is that fair to say, Dave?
I think that's fair to say. And we might, obviously when we get into it, I think the listeners will probably find that some of the benefits that we're talking about with, should I give it away? Okay. Well, we're going to be talking about growth hormone releasing peptides. Some of the benefits that we're going to be talking about, they're probably going to be more in relation to things like, the benefits around sleep, the benefits around, we're probably going to talk about, even aspects around like motility, intestinal churning.
Yeah, that's right. It's multifaceted. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like obviously, and that's the thing we've talked about with a lot of these peptides so far, is peptides are generally not doing just one thing. And so yes, it might be like a particular function or purpose someone's using a peptide for, but great examples, GHKCE or thymosin beta 4. We've talked about these in so many different episodes so far because they do so many different things. And these peptides we're going to talk about today are no different. They're
exactly right.
Multiple benefits, multiple effects, and it's not just body comp.
And we're all about, I think we just mention this all the time, okay? We're about really multifaceted compounds that just cover a lot of bases, yeah? And so, with the growth hormone releasing peptides, okay, we should say that they're probably not peptides that we would use on a frequent basis. We should say that, okay? I don't know. I don't think you use them that often.
We'll talk about as we go through each one, because different ones I'd use more or less than others. But yeah, they're not going to be the ones there's some peptides that we would use with the vast majority of our clients. And then there's other peptides that are very much a selective use, case by case kind of scenario. And these would certainly fall into that category. These would be, I don't think any of the peptides we're going to talk about today would be in the top half a dozen peptides that I would use in terms of how regularly I'm recommending particular peptides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So should we get into it?
Let's get into it. Where do we want to start?
Well, let's probably start with ipamorelin.
Ipamorelin is kind of like the OG, isn't it?
I think so. I think it really is when it comes to the growth hormone releasing peptides.
Yeah,
and more for that multifaceted concept again. Yeah.
Exactly. And it is one that I could understand could feature in a lot of different protocols. I'm certainly not against IPA, and I do use IPA. I've got a number of clients who use it. I've used it myself a couple of times. I don't want to jump the gun and get to the end at the start, but my issue with IPA is purely administration based. This is something that needs to be administered minimum once a day. Really, you're probably looking at twice a day. And I would say for the benefit you're getting out of IPA to have to be injecting it twice a day, not many people, I find people's appetite for injecting things tends to cap out at probably about 2 different injections per day. I don't know how you feel about this, but I find once people are injecting a third compound, it gets old really quickly. And so to be using up 2 injections just on ipamorelin, I think that's a really high commitment for just one compound. So that's my main issue with it. But let's talk about, what does it even do? What is ipamorelin?
Okay, so once again, it comes under that category as growth hormone releasing peptide, and it's made up of 5 amino acids.
Maybe we should give people a little 101 on growth hormone itself, because that's kind of like the hero in this whole podcast. So yeah, do we want to talk about why growth hormone even matters?
Yeah, I mean, like, well, I wouldn't mind going into some of the things that, you know, people might not know about growth hormone.
Yeah.
Okay. But I mean, do we want to start with some of the most obvious? Okay, which would be like, you know, muscle recovery, muscle repair, you know, these types of factors. I mean, there's probably a lot to growth hormone. Okay. I mean, even things like, you know, enteric hormones. So enteric hormones are like gut hormones. There's ghrelin. Okay, so ghrelin actually helps with the secretion of growth hormone from the anterior pituitary gland. Okay, which is obviously, you know, within the brain. Yeah, and I think we've actually spoken about this in another podcast. Okay, where we talked about even, you know, potential benefits. Well, not potential benefits. I think it's been documented of something like melatonin around something like growth hormone. Because melatonin. Okay, I think ipamorelin does this as well. Okay, it suppresses somatostatin. Yeah. Okay. And,
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah, and so somatostatin. Okay, it basically inhibits the secretion of growth hormone from the anterior pituitary gland. And so melatonin has actually got those benefits. Okay, and you know, you can find there's obviously research, okay, where they did, what was it, like, I think one research paper was like 5 milligrams of like melatonin. And this was obviously had a positive impact on increasing like growth hormone. Okay. And wasn't that in like NFL players? Okay. I think it was like American footballers. Okay. Where they did that like pre-training. Yeah. Okay. I think there was another one where they used like 6 milligrams. Anyway, I don't want to turn it into a podcast talking about, you know, like melatonin. Okay. But, the other thing, you know how I always say that there's always like these loops in the body. Okay. The other thing that's pretty interesting around growth hormone is just like the relationship with like sleep as well. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we would say this has a huge knock-on effect. Okay. To body composition and hypertrophy and putting on muscle. Yeah. Okay. Because, you know, something that would be really bad around your ability to maximize what you're going to get out of the muscle fibers, okay, correct me if I'm wrong here, okay, is going to be sleep deprivation and short sleep time frames.
Well, you know what's interesting there, Dave, because this is going to feed into what we're going to talk about, is why that is so negative is mostly because of the impact that has on cortisol. And so cortisol is then going to upregulate muscle protein breakdown. So it means you're going to go into that stimulus period from your training is going to be shorter until you go into a period of atrophy again. Now, that's really interesting because we're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul in some ways with some of these peptides, because some of them will help enhance growth hormone, but they'll also increase cortisol. So is that really going to be the best thing from a body comp standpoint? Maybe not.
Well, and this is where, you know, like, well, ipamorelin is pretty interesting around this as well. Yeah. Okay. Because this is where you would say something like ipamorelin, okay, you know, as far as, you know, I can make out from the literature, okay, it doesn't raise like cortisol, okay, even things like, it doesn't have this impact on things like aldosterone, which is a mineral corticoid, and prolactin, and okay, so
which is really important, because this is why, because there's other growth hormone related peptides we're not going to talk about, right? And the reason we're not talking about them is because they do such a significant impact around things like ghrelin and prolactin and cortisol, although some of the ones we're going to talk about do impact cortisol. And, you know, is it really worth it at that stage? You know, at that point where you're causing huge amounts of water retention and you're causing heat, you know, huge increases in cortisol and you know, insulin resistance. And at that point, I don't know that it's, I mean, I personally don't think it's worth the trade-off, you know? So there is a lot of other peptides out there as well we're not going to talk about, because if you want some of these benefits, you're going to get it with something like ipamorelin without all those other side effects.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so what obviously, this loop that I'm talking about, okay, is that if you look at the deepest stages of sleep, yeah, okay, slow wave sleep, yeah, okay, that during that, okay, it drives maximum growth hormone secretion, yeah, okay. Now, the sort of loop that I'm talking about here, okay, that this in turn helps to regulate sleep quality, okay, and wakefulness, okay, by doing that. Okay, this is sort of like this loop. Okay, now I actually looked at some research, but look, to be honest, okay, it was actually to do with like recombinant human growth hormone.
Yeah.
Okay, somatropin, yeah, okay, which I think they did like 4 months, okay, with that, okay, and it can't remember the dosage, okay, but it partly reversed sleep disturbances. Okay, so I'm just saying that there's.
So that's literally just taking growth hormone, by the way, in case anyone's confused.
Yeah. Okay.
Which that's a conversation for another time. But the main concern of a few with that is that it is going to have a suppressive effect. So if you're taking growth hormone, you're now producing less growth hormone yourself, right? Same as most hormones, right? You take testosterone, you produce less testosterone. These peptides don't work like that. Yes, it can be like a desensitization that can occur over time, but it's not going to have a negative feedback loop in your own production, is it?
Well, and obviously it's not all hormones as well, yeah, okay, because that's probably a conversation for another time, yeah, okay, because that is like pregnenolone, for example.
Yeah, exactly. It's not all.
So how many, because I did a bit of research around this actually, okay, how many people would actually, so obviously the benefits around growth hormone, okay, and you could say if people had a growth hormone deficiency, okay, then they would probably be looking at these types of like growth hormone releasing peptides and so forth. Okay. Now, how common is a growth hormone deficiency? I'd say it's relatively rare. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
When I looked at some stats around this, okay, I think it was like two to three per 10,000 people. Okay. So it's not the highest percentage. Okay. And then I checked because sometimes you do hear about this obviously happening with children.
Yep.
Seems to be a relatively similar ratio. Okay. I think it's like 1 in 4,000, okay, to 10,000 children. Okay. Now, one thing I did want to bring up, okay, is that would you make a big deal, sort of like a question in this, yeah, okay, would you make a big deal of the variance in the production of growth hormone with the sexes? So what I mean by this, okay, because you would say like the men's production of growth hormone is predominantly at night, yeah? Okay.
Yep.
I think they say there probably some variance around this, okay, anywhere between about 60 to 75%, okay, is of the growth hormone secretion, okay, in men occurs during I think it's like the first few hours of sleep, okay, and so this is sort of associated with like deep slow wave sleep, okay. Now one thing we would say on that, okay, or I'm sure you would agree with me, okay, that's why it's so important, okay, like the quality of the sleep, okay, probably a whole other conversation, okay, but with females, okay, I've heard people say they produce it more evenly throughout the day, okay, but isn't it that there's more distinct bursts, okay, like throughout the day, and they get, like pulses, okay, and they might get like, I think it's quite large, isn't it, okay, like they're getting like 13 or 14 sort of like pulses over a 24-hour, okay, so it's more consistent, okay, the growth hormone concentrations, growth hormone concentration levels throughout the day for females, okay. Do you think that that because of, sleep disturbances and poor quality sleep, okay, do you think that, I guess the question I'm asking, okay, do you think that becomes even more valuable for
guys who
for guys?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. I mean, like, I wonder. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to that. I mean, I don't know. A guy's more susceptible to changes in cortisol from sleep deprivation. I don't know. I've not looked into differences between genders for things like sleep deprivation, but yeah, it'd be an interesting rabbit hole to go down for sure.
Anyway, that's something I was just thinking in my head. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder.
Whether it's more value there. Okay. That's not me saying there's no value for women. Okay. But I wonder if there's even more value. Okay. I mean, like, I'm sure you would agree with me around this. Okay? I mean, a lot of people are going to complain of like poor quality sleep. Okay. And just, problems getting to sleep. Obviously, we're not going to get into the weeds of why that's happening. Yeah, okay. But that's, look, obviously the big point, this is why I brought it up, okay, is that ipamorelin, has got these benefits around, like sleep. Okay. And isn't that why a lot of the time they talk about like, a nighttime dosage with the
Yeah,
ipamorelin?
generally, yeah.
Yeah.
So with IPA, I mean, like I said, it's often suggested twice a day. You can get away with once a day, but generally the time you would dose this would be before bed. And like you said, that's for the potential benefit there around the natural kind of release of growth hormone. Bearing in mind as well that you do need to be careful about timing it with food. So you do want it away from food. I think we should cover a couple other things around what growth hormone does, because naturally when people hear growth hormone, they just think muscle, right? Growth, get bigger. And in fact, and this is partly why I think that these peptides as a whole, from a body comp standpoint, at least from a muscle gain standpoint, are overrated, is because growth hormone doesn't really do that significantly. Like, yes, it is associated with increases in lean mass. It's associated with increases in strength. But I would actually say I suspect a lot of that is due to water. So, we know that there's increases in fluid retention when people are using some of these growth hormone peptides and compounds we're talking about. And we know that increasing water retention is going to change internal moment arm length. It's going to increase strength. It's going to increase essentially weight. And then if you increase weight, and this is my issue with some of these studies where, for example, we'll talk about MK677 in a moment, but we've got studies in older adults where they gain a decent amount of lean mass, but they're gaining weight, they're holding fluid, and if you're not training, that additional body weight is going to stimulate more muscle fibers just in day-to-day activity. It's the exact same thing you see when people wear weighted vests for 8 to 10 hours a day. They gain a bit of muscle. Why? Because your baseline weight has gone up, and now you're going to be using slightly more of your muscle fibers in your lower body. So I don't think that growth hormone is that amazing. Yes, if you're using significant amounts of exogenous growth hormone and you're combining that with an androgen like testosterone, yes, that's a totally different story. But in terms of enhancing your own natural production, is it going to lead to massive amounts of muscle tissue and contractile proteins? More to the point, no, not really. So yes, there's benefits around sleep. You've mentioned, I think you
could I just one thing on that? Okay,
yeah,
it's really interesting. Yeah, just from a growth perspective, okay, could we say, because if you look at some of the data around like ipamorelin, okay, they've obviously used that for treatment, okay, and this is actually, I think this research was done on children. Yeah. Okay. And so once again, okay, it's sort of like these people are constantly saying, okay, well, there's no human trials.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we're going to do
every peptide we're talking about today has human trials.
Yeah, exactly right. Okay. It's just crazy. Okay. So, and this is in children. Yeah. Okay. So I think they were looking at ipamorelin, okay, for treatment of children that actually have like growth retardation. Yeah. Okay. But if you look at some of the benefits around ipamorelin, okay, it's around sort of like bone growth. Okay?
Yes, exactly right.
So I'm saying is that there's obviously benefits around growth, yeah, okay, but it's these huge benefits around growth, okay, coming around aspects around like bone, yeah, okay,
yes,
like bone growth, increasing like bone growth, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So from like a bone mineral density standpoint, yes, potential benefits. If you had someone who had, osteoporosis, there could be potential benefits there. You mentioned like wound healing and like tissue repair, potentially benefits there as well, like with skin healing and I mean, even potentially from like an anti-aging perspective, we didn't talk about this in our podcast, but potentially from that standpoint, even with connective tissue, it's kind of interesting as well. And so you could look at the benefit of potentially combining some of these peptides with something like BPC or something like thymosin beta 4 from a healing standpoint. So those are the things I think are a little bit underrated and sort of overlooked when it comes to some of the benefits of growth hormone.
Yeah, and the other thing with ipamorelin, I think there might have been some stuff around sort of even like boosting the impact of like NAD.
Okay.
So NAD, okay, like what's classified as like a coenzyme, okay, like a helper molecule. And what we're talking about, without going too far down the rabbit hole with like NAD, okay, is aspects around, cellular repair and even like the anti-aging aspects that you were talking about, okay? So I think I came across some stuff, okay, where they were basically saying that the ipamorelin, okay, could actually help to optimize like this sort of cellular environment, okay, that would maximize the benefits of something like NAD plus. Yeah, okay. And then actually help with some of those things like anti-aging, metabolism, cellular repair, and all that type of stuff. Yeah, okay. Anyway, I'm not saying that that's all conclusive, yeah, okay, but I remember coming across like, some information around that.
And then obviously maybe the most interesting piece from a body composition standpoint is going to be more around fat loss and in particular visceral fat. And that's where I think these compounds are interesting from a body comp standpoint, not so much from building muscle, but more from this kind of fat loss, visceral fat standpoint. Yeah. So from a body comp standpoint, probably the most interesting thing that these compounds do is less around muscle building, but more from a fat loss perspective, and in particular, visceral fat. Now, some of these do that a little bit better than others, but certainly in terms of growth hormone as a whole, that's going to be one of the benefits there. So realistically, IPA is kind of working on two different mechanisms, right? So it's helping inhibit somatostatin, which is acting like an inhibitor to growth hormone release. And then it's also increasing growth hormone release itself as well, right? So it's not acting like an exogenous growth hormone where you're going to get, you can't just take more IPA and then suddenly you're producing 5 times more growth hormone than what you would naturally. It's kind of working within the limitations of your own physiology, right? So you're going to get a enhanced or optimal sort of positive effect of what you would naturally be able to produce without a super physiological growth hormone output, right? So, and that's why realistically these are not having that massive effect on body composition.
Yeah, I mean, is it worthwhile saying that ipamorelin, it doesn't really promote hunger, like obviously as can happen, okay, with some of these other growth hormone releasing peptides. Okay, you're not going to get that with like ipamorelin. Do like something that I've actually like I've been researching like more recently, which I just found like pretty, I don't want to say surprising, okay, but I just found it like really fascinating and really interesting. And that was to do with like the benefits of ipamorelin around even just like motility, okay, like smooth peristalsis and intestinal churning. I mean, it's probably, I don't know about you, okay, but it's probably something that I would not have considered, okay, that ipamorelin would have those types of benefits, okay. But there was I was telling you about a mouse study that I looked at, okay, but I think you told me that there was also like a human trial as well. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, in over 100 humans as well. So we've got both animal and human data on this.
Yeah, so it's a thing called postoperative, okay, like ileus, which is layman's terms, okay, like it's a disruption to basically like bowel motility, and that was following like surgery. Yeah, okay. And so what happens here is that it would cause like quite bad, like, abdominal distension and even like a inability to pass gas. Okay. And so that's going to cause pretty bad bloating and all that type of stuff. So with the ipamorelin, the one that I was looking at was, it was a mouse, parative ileus,
Mhm.
and that basically accelerated gastric emptying, and it stimulated like contractions of the stomach muscles, basically helping with just like grind, sort of mix it up and then sort of push it through to the small intestine, which is just intestinal churning. Okay. And so that's pretty interesting.
It is
Yeah.
interesting, and it's realistically it's IPA that's going to do that more than some of these others, right? So we're going to talk about CJC, we'll talk about testosterone in a second. Now, we've kind of briefly touched on these different ways that these compounds are helping with growth hormone. And one of the ways is by acting as a ghrelin mimetic. And so IPA is acting as a ghrelin mimetic. And my understanding with what you're talking about there with the prokinetic properties, that's specific to this. My understanding is to the ghrelin mimetic compounds. So those like testosterone, which is working more on the pituitary gland side of things, my understanding is that's probably not going to do the same thing from a motility prokinetic standpoint. So if you were looking at, say you had a client who had, dysmotility, they had maybe like SIBO, some kind of impaired motility, disorder, then arguably ipamorelin is probably going to be the better choice for them over Tessa, even though Tessa, which we'll talk about, has stronger data in terms of visceral fat loss and potentially body composition benefits.
Well, even like, probably some of the benefits of like, just like reducing like inflammatory load as well.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think there was some pretty good stuff around testosterone. I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, okay, but and like just improving like inflammatory indices, okay, like I think CRP, and that was in human trials. Okay, it was like HIV positive individuals.
Which is what most of the data is.
Yeah, well, exactly. So now the only reason I'm bringing that up, okay, because, well, if someone's got like a massive ramp up in like pro-inflammatory proteins, I mean, there are benefits there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But you would say, what's the greater problem with someone like, SIBO? Okay, well, it's a motility issue. Okay, it's a gas exchange issue. Okay, and so you would probably think, okay, that something like ipamorelin would be, would just be better around that.
Yeah. So in terms of using IPA, so we've talked about, okay, before bed, unless, every now and then you'll get someone who actually has the opposite, where they actually experience insomnia when they use it. I've had a few clients get that.
Is that, I mean, like I haven't had a client. I mean, it's a small sample size, but I haven't had a client who's experienced that. I mean, is that an adverse event or an adverse effect that a lot of people they document, or?
It is certainly spoken about anecdotally. I don't know if it's noted in any of the studies. I don't know if it's an effect just from the injection or if it's the actual ipamorelin itself. I've seen it a handful of times. And in those cases, if we just move the injection to early in the day, there's no issues. Yeah. So it's not like it's chronically keeping them awake. It's more that it seems to have this kind of stimulatory effect before bed. So I would normally start trying it before bed, see how you go. If you sleep better, most people generally should report that they experience a deeper sleep. Cool, leave it there. Otherwise, I would normally do it, say, before training or just in the morning would be fine as well. In terms of who you might use
Did
for.
we say the dosage? I think we said the dosage. Yeah, it was generally about 100 mcg.
Yeah, give or take. You can go a little bit high if you're doing a single injection. And this is all of these growth hormone peptides are things realistically you're going to do some form of a cycle with, right? And that can be, my preferred, honestly, would actually be a within week cycle. So you're doing, say, 5 days on, 2 days off. But, you could theoretically do, 8 to 12 weeks on, 4 weeks off, whatever. But there is desensitization that will occur with long-term chronic use.
And you can use ipamorelin, okay, like by itself. You can use it by itself. But some people might know, okay, that you can use it alongside like CJC 1295.
Yeah, and this is where it becomes interesting, right? Because we've just mentioned how this is acting as a ghrelin mimetic. And then, so it's mimicking ghrelin, and there's other compounds that do that as well. But then there's other pathways for essentially supporting growth hormone, and that's more from a pituitary gland standpoint. So that's going to mimic growth hormone releasing hormone instead. So you can theoretically get this synergistic effect by combining a peptide that's biased towards one of these pathways with another peptide biased towards the other pathway.
And I think, and once again, just to break down this whole thing of like, there's not a lot of human trials. They go, well, with the CJC 1295, this was administering it subcutaneous. Okay, so obviously in the belly fat, that was in healthy adults. Yeah, okay, and I think you can actually find some. I think might be some stuff around children. Don't fully quote me on that. Okay, but that resulted in an increase in growth hormone, IGF-1 levels, growth factors, and I was telling you about this. Okay, well, if you actually look at it, it was really well tolerated. Okay, it was actually safe within the research. And guess what? It was human trials again. Okay, so so I just want to mention that.
Yeah. So generally speaking, you'll see CJC. Usually, you'll see combined with ipamorelin. I guess there will be places that sell it separately, but usually it'll be combined, and that's because you are getting this synergistic effect. Because CJC is not working; it's not binding to, it's not acting on ghrelin receptors essentially. So it's working off this totally separate mechanism, which means it shouldn't have the same stimulatory effect around appetite as some other compounds. Not that ipamorelin is going to be significant there, but some of these other ghrelin receptor agonists, they do stimulate appetite. So that combo of IPA with CJC is quite good in terms of not getting some of those negative effects around appetite, negative effects around cortisol, like we were talking about, and you're enhancing the effect of either one separately because you're maximizing both. The pituitary gland kind of stimulus of growth hormone, and then the sort of positive effect of growth hormone as well. Now, in terms of CJC, I've never used this by itself. I've only ever used this with IPA. Is there anything? Is
there? I mean, like, because obviously, I've never used it by itself either. Okay, I mean, most of the time it's like people would be doing like a stack, yeah. Okay? Yeah. Where they're using the CJC 1295 and ipamorelin, and I think the dose is you sort of go what 200 mcg. I think it might be, and once again, obviously there's some variance within that. Okay?
Yeah, I would basically match the IPA dose.
Yeah. I think there's some variance. Yeah, once again, okay, but that's nighttime administration, and I mean, isn't there some stuff I'm doing that once daily? Okay, or you could do it like 3 times a week, or so there might be some variance around the sort of dosaging there, but. To answer your question, I mean, well, if you look at the research, okay, I mean, obviously in that research they're just doing it on the CJC 1295, and that is just around the facts of trying to increase growth hormone and IGF-1 levels, and helping with growth factors. So I'm assuming you can, okay, do it. I mean, obviously they're doing that research, okay. So, but. I mean, I have never used it by itself, and I've never come across too many people who've even spoke about using that by itself.
But I don't know this for sure. I don't know if you know or not. My suspicion, and I should look this up before we started, is in the studies they're probably using CJC with DAC. Would be my guess.
That's a good question. I couldn't say that I could remember, yeah.
And it's hard because sometimes things don't specify. Now, in terms of most of the CJC someone's going to find online, usually it'll say CJC no DAC, or it'll just say CJC, right, which is usually going to be no DAC. Now, the main difference that's going to make is essentially the half-life. So if you use CJC no DAC, then that's shortening the half. Well, it's not shortening. I guess that's sort of the standard.
Because the half-life for ipamorelin is like what, 2.5 hours or something like that.
Yeah, it's quite short. Yeah. And CJC 1295 without the DAC, that's also very fast acting. We're talking about an hour or so. And so that pairing works really well because they're both going to create sort of this natural physiological growth hormone pulse, right? So it's kind of matching what your body's naturally doing. If you're using it with DAC, that's extending that out to about a week or so. And so then you're kind of getting this sort of super physiological growth hormone elevation, which is not particularly, I wouldn't say it's sort of the purpose or the reason I would be looking at using these compounds. And you're going to see more, what I would say as side effects with that. So you're going to see more impact around water retention, probably that being the main one. Sometimes you can get like maybe joint pain, stuff like that as well. So generally speaking, it's going to be CJC, no DAC. And that's where I'd be looking at pairing it. But I do, because even if you're using it with DAC added, then you're using something that's, lasting for about a week, pairing it with IPA, which is lasting, a couple of hours. It's sort of a little bit redundant at that point, and how you're going to dose CJC. So, I wouldn't really be looking at going down that path, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So which one are we going to cover next?
Well, I guess we go to Tessa, so tesamorelin. And I mean, this you would say is sort of like a relatively new addition to the growth hormone peptides-ish. I mean, it's certainly been used for years now, but it was kind of like a cool advancement when it started being used a few years ago. And this is the one that has the most compelling human data on it for body composition, or at least for visceral fat.
Yeah. So, okay. Look, I don't know about you. Like, I like a lot of the data around like tesamorelin, and this is actually out of the growth hormone releasing peptides. Okay. It's actually probably the one that I use the most with clients, and maybe I'll go into some of the major reasons that I would consider, using that. But if we just look at what tesamorelin is, okay, well, obviously we know it's a growth hormone releasing peptide, okay, but it's 44 amino acids, and yes, it increases growth hormone, IGF-1, and I think what it does, it like binds and stimulates like the growth hormone releasing hormone receptors.
Yeah. So it's working the same way CJC is working. So it's different to IPA, but same as CJC.
Yeah. Now, look, what would I say would be? Well, I already mentioned, okay, that if someone, let's say you had someone coming to you and they had like elevated inflammatory markers, like they had like elevated like CRP. Well, tesamorelin is going to have some benefits around that, okay, because they've obviously documented that, okay, when it came to inflammatory indices, okay, around CRP, and that was obviously in the HIV positive, individuals. Yeah, okay. Now, do we want to talk about some of the other benefits and then go into the body composition?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, I mean, so, some of the other, potential benefits that you would get, okay, would be even aspects around, I think it also influences like bone mineral density as well. I think there's some stuff around helping with like lipid metabolism. There's some cardiovascular benefits there as well, like even enhancing like vascular health. So, maybe if you had like there would probably be this certain criteria that you would be looking at for the type of individual that you would want to use that for. Okay, or use that with. Okay, so it might be someone. Okay, they've got like we're talking about someone having a growth hormone deficiency. Yeah, okay, maybe these individuals have higher things like fasting triglycerides, or they've got issues around I don't really love body mass index as a indicator. Okay, but maybe they've got like higher body mass index. Okay, they've got issues around like hypertension. There's elevation in these inflammatory markers like CRP. Okay, well this might be some of the this might be some of the criteria that you look at in terms of tesamorelin is actually going to have some it's going to tick a lot of those boxes. Okay, actually, interesting enough. Okay, like even I'd probably look at another one would be maybe someone having like fatty liver or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So I don't know if you've seen this stuff where I think it was like 35% of the individuals receive, and once again, okay, human trials with like testosterone, okay, 35% of the individuals that were receiving like testosterone, okay, they had a reduction in I think it was to do with the proportion of fat, okay, within the liver. Okay, they had the placebo. I think it was like, that was 4%. So even in like the aspects around fatty liver, you're going to get benefits around like testosterone, and okay, even around, I think testosterone was pretty effective for increasing like skeletal muscle area, density, having these types of benefits. Is any other ones that you can think of?
No, I mean, like, obviously the real interesting one there, I'd say, is the visceral fat in the HIV patients. And do you remember how long that study was for?
Well, and we will get into this. It's pretty long, yeah. Because I think the testosterone, hopefully I'm getting this right. Okay, it was like maybe it was to do with like how the testosterone, in terms of how long it maintained the reduction for. Okay, I think it maintained the reduction for like something like 52 weeks.
Yeah, that was my recollection as well, and that was because that was all around the metabolic improvements, wasn't it? That was like I think
that's the one that actually improved, like, things like lipids and
triglycerides, I think glucose as well.
Exactly. And obviously the improvement of the body image. Okay, one thing I want to mention around that, okay, was it was just inevitable that we were going to speak about this. Okay, well, bear in mind, okay, that was based on a 2 milligram dosage. Yeah.
Yes.
So that was given daily. Yes. This is probably the big pointed discussion around testosterone. Yeah.
Yeah. So just so we're clear, so in the study they used 2 milligrams daily of testosterone, and they used it for. My understanding is one group used it for 6 months.
6 months.
12 months.
Yeah.
I feel like it was one of those studies
where 6 months.
Like the optional like continuation for some participants.
Well, even when they were looking at the stuff with, because you jogged my memory. Okay, when they were looking at even the stuff around like the reduction in like liver fat. That the testosterone was administered for 6 months.
Yeah. They would have done the measurements after the 6 month period.
Exactly.
And that was, I don't know if you mentioned or not. So there was something like a 20% reduction in visceral fat. Do you remember the exact? I think it was.
I don't remember the exact.
I think it was
amount.
just shy of 20%, which is obviously pretty significant, right? And then now that was.
But bear in mind, just on that, okay, because. So yes, okay, obviously the testosterone reduced like visceral adipose tissue and so forth, but I think, wasn't that at something like, I saw that at 26 weeks?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, obviously if someone stops using these compounds, if they go back to, same lifestyle, same diet, everything else, and all they do is stop taking testosterone, that visceral fat's going to come back, right? Like this is not like a one and done. You get rid of all your visceral fat, improve your triglycerides, your glucose, your lipid metabolism, and suddenly everything's fixed. This is a tool while you're hopefully also making other changes, or it's a tool that you cycle in long term, right? Like it's not. And I guess this is kind of my issue with these compounds is. They're not, you don't just take them for 4 weeks and get a benefit and you're done. These are like long-term commitments. And then you mentioned they use 2 milligrams in this study. Yeah. Now, what would you say a standard dose of testing is? Maybe 1 milligram? That's what most people are using?
With testosterone?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, like, I would say, probably. I mean, a lot of time I can be recommending just like 1 milligram.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I would normally recommend. And why are you recommending 1 milligram?
Well, if I'm honest here, it's not the cheapest peptide going around.
That's why I'm recommending 1 milligram.
Yeah. I mean, I almost feel slightly embarrassed saying that.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm just being like honest. Yeah. It's quite an expensive peptide.
I mean, we're talking a couple $100 for like 2 weeks.
Yeah. And the thing is, if like you're using because if like, once again, based on the studies, okay, they're using 2 milligrams, subcutaneous. We're talking about the time frame here. They're doing that daily. I mean, it shouldn't really be about cost. Yeah. Okay. But that is going to be pretty expensive.
Yeah, it is.
So and that's why I think a lot of time they sort of suggesting like 1 milligram daily. Okay, is it probably really coming down to that factor? I think it
100%. I think that's the only factor, and that's why I do it, to be honest. And like total transparency, I haven't used testosterone myself because I can't justify the cost of that.
Yeah.
And I'm a pretty low responder to things. I know that if I use it, I'm probably going to need 2 milligrams. And like we're literally talking like $200 a week or something, $150 a week, something along those lines, if you're using a dose like that. And it's like for that benefit, I'm like,
because like all the stuff that we were talking about, like helping with because obviously once again the HIV patients get abnormal fat redistribution and metabolic changes and improving the body composition, the lean body mass, and even the IGF-1 levels. It's based on the 2 milligrams, yeah.
Yeah. And again, I like it. I like that data. I think that's really encouraging, and it's good human data. I mean, testosterone, for people who seem to think this matters, it's FDA approved. So, if that's a box of yours that you want ticking, then there you go.
Yeah, well, and that's I mean, like that's a very good point to bring up, okay, because it was FDA approved for the reduction of what, okay, the excess abdominal fat.
Yeah.
Okay. Obviously, in the adults with the HIV. Okay. So it was FDA approved for that. Yeah.
But yeah, it's very expensive. Ipamorelin, CJC, not that expensive with the doses you need. Yeah. So
it's a shame. It's a shame. Like, once again, I feel a bit embarrassed saying that's the reason I would, I'd be looking at the 1 milligrams. Go, but I mean, obviously, we just got to be honest here. Yeah. Okay. And just say, I like it. Okay, for all the reasons that I spoke about, and I have used it with a few clients. I the one thing that deters me, okay, is the fact that I look at it and go, well, it's going to be relatively high dosage. Okay, it's going to be pretty expensive for the client. Okay, and is that
is it worth it when you add in all the other things that are potentially more beneficial?
Yeah.
And I think these things have been overlooked. I think testosterone's been overlooked because by the time it became accessible, suddenly we've got GLP-1s that are now being used and now fairly readily available. And I think in terms of the metabolic benefits, really, I think GLP-1s are blowing everything else out of the water. And realistically, they're a lot cheaper. So I do think Tessa, if it was cheaper, I would absolutely get more clients on it. But for the cost, I don't know that it's worth it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the preference would be, I think from my perspective, would be to use something like testosterone, okay, just because of some of those things that we're talking about, like the elevated CRP and someone's got hypertension.
Well, I mean, we'll cover this when we get into the GLP-1 podcast. There might be an area that we disagree on. But what I think would be interesting is combining them. And I would be like, for me personally, that's an option I would prefer to do. If I was going to use something like retatrutide, I would be combining it with testosterone. But again, cost, it's just so expensive. Now, there's one more we want to talk about. Is there anything else you want to say about Tessa before we move on?
No, I think we've covered like all the main points. The big point being is like, I mean, it is a shame, okay, that it has to be relatively high dosage, and once again the time period, okay, that you have to run that for, and it's going to start to add up. Yeah.
And I guess a question then would become, how would Tessa compare to IPA plus CJC? And we don't have the data on that.
It's a very good question.
I don't know, but obviously CJC and IPA is much, much cheaper. You are getting, CJC is not going to be as potent in its effect as testosterone, but because you're working off two different pathways there, is our combination going to be potentially better? yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's, I guess, more potential for there to be some ghrelin issues with the IPA CJC combination. So maybe increases in appetite, but really you don't see that much with
No,
ipamorelin.
not really. No,
So
not
I do
really.
think that's a viable alternative for someone if they can't afford tesamorelin.
Mm.
So the last one we want to talk about is not even a peptide.
Yeah, it's classified. What's classified as a non-peptide? Yeah,
Yeah, well, exactly. It's not. It's
yeah.
It's a, what is it?
Well,
A
it's a
ghrelin.
it's a like classified as a mimicker. Yeah, like a mimicker of like growth hormone releasing peptide or something like that. Like it's
Ghrelin. This is
what
a ghrelin mimetic.
it's
Yeah.
a ghrelin agonist. That's what
Yeah.
it's classified as. Yeah.
So MK677, and this is
Well,
kind of
I don't like. I just want to say from the get go. Okay, like I know you've, like I have not used this with clients. I mean, obviously I've looked at the data, but it's not something that I've. It's not something that I've utilized.
yeah. I mean, MK was one of those like old school ones years ago when peptides were barely heard of and hard to get. MK's kind of been available for a very long time. Do you remember when SARMs were a thing and everyone was using SARMs? I mean, that's when MK was, in its heyday. So I've used MK with myself. I've used it a few times. I've used it with clients. But I would be quite selective. If, back in the day, before we had any other good options, if I had a client who said, hey, I want to use anything except for anabolics to try to increase muscle mass, I'd say, look, let's not expect the world out of this, but let's use MK. We may as well add it. And part of why I would use it, and part of probably the only reason I use it with anyone now, is its ability to stimulate hunger.
Mm.
And if anyone's ever used MK677, they'll know. I mean, I'm assuming they'll know. Maybe not everyone responds exactly the same way, but when you start, often you're waking up ravenous, and you'll just eat anything. And so if you've got someone who their goal is just to gain weight, gain muscle, gain any weight, then they're sort of a hard gainer, and maybe they find it hard to eat enough. That's where potentially you could have some benefit with it.
I think I think I was telling you, and I don't have a lot of experience with this particular SARM that I was looking at within the research go, but they combine MK677 with a SARM, the Lingandrol or something like that. I think you knew it, okay, but you knew it as the sort of like the abbreviation, okay. And so that combination, okay, like it increased like body mass and lean mass and fat-free mass, okay, but there was some negative. I think there's negative impact on like bone and liver enzymes and
significant effect on liver enzymes.
Yeah, and even was there impact on the lipids and but did it raise up the testosterone levels? I think it might have been
reduced like androgen receptor sensitivity or something.
So the impact on the total and the free testosterone, but I think it was a negative impact on follicle stimulating hormone potentially there as well. But what I was saying to you, which hard to say, is something like MK677. Okay, if you're having this positive impact on, increasing appetite, is there some scope for even, I know there's a lot more to it than this, okay, but is there some scope with something like if someone's got like a anorexia nervosa or bulimia nervosa, okay, where they, obviously, I know there's a lot more to it than that, okay, but can it actually help to, stimulate appetite, okay?
Yeah, I think if someone's in touch with their own psychology and they know what it is that their limitation is, then some of these compounds could have benefit.
By no means do I want to say that that's a that's a solution to that problem. Does that make sense?
No, totally. But it certainly could be a tool for the right person. I spoke to someone today who has the opposite issue, where they simply are unable to ever feel satisfied, and for them, and they've done a lot of work. They've done a lot of trauma response work, and they're very sort of in touch with why they're experiencing some of these responses, and they have good kind of control mechanisms to kind of limit themselves. But for a situation like that, it's something like maybe retatrutide, like a GLP-1 at a low dose, that could be a really interesting tool for them. Yeah. And then obviously you've got someone who maybe on the opposite end of the spectrum just has issues actually ever stimulating the appetite. Okay, maybe for periods of time, yeah, something like a ghrelin mimetic or receptor agonist could be beneficial. So I do think, and that's kind of the benefit of the beauty in peptides, not that this is a peptide, but they obviously have some of these multifaceted kind of, mechanisms of action.
Didn't they with like MK677? I think they were using it in like an elderly population. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a few studies on it in older people, right? And that's partly why I liked the idea of MK compared to other compounds, because again, we've got human data and we've got long-term human data. We're talking 1 to 2 years, right? So that's like a significant amount of time, and also decent dose. They were using I think 25 milligrams in that 2-year study. Yeah. Which is, the dose I would probably recommend if someone was going to use it. But that's,
and obviously they were documenting like mainly that sort of significant increase in the IGF-1 levels in the growth hormone and so forth. But and so I think, that's probably the best data we've got. And if you look at that, what do you see? You see that people had improvements in sleep, they had improvements, they had increases in hunger, and the increases in hunger tended to be a little bit more transient. So they would persist for usually a few months, and then they would sort of, level out. And then they had increases in fat-free mass. So there was, what was it about? Wasn't there stuff in like young, like it might have been younger adults, where they showed there was a decrease in like visceral fat, like abdominal visceral fat. I don't know if I'm butchering that, but I think there was some stuff around that.
Yeah. Okay. Again, I wouldn't be surprised. Obviously, if we're working around growth hormone. But, this is because of these studies, especially in these older people, where we do see a couple of kilos of lean mass increase. I think people take that and they assume, therefore, this is an alternative or a replacement for anabolic agents. And it's not. We're talking, even if you look at the data, and again, we're talking sort of 1 to 2 kilos of fat-free mass, that's including fluid. We know that there's increases in water retention and edema when they're using something like MK677. So the amount of actual contractile protein increases is going to be minimal, right? And again, I come back to my point before, if you're increasing body weight, you're naturally going to increase some amount of muscle tissue as well. So I look at that and I'm like, yeah, okay, if you're willing to do anything for a couple of 100 grams of muscle, maybe that's worth adding in. Especially I do think potentially, and this is me speculating, but if I've got a client who's on TRT, say I've got a client who doesn't want to run a full anabolic cycle, but they're on TRT or maybe, slightly above TRT, maybe they're on a GLP-1 agonist. That's where I think maybe something like MK could have some interesting benefit, or, some of these other growth hormone peptides, because that synergy between the growth hormone and testosterone, if we're looking for something that's actually going to have an impact around muscle mass, that's probably the way to do it. But
just on that, okay, because like, would you say that with the MK677, this is where the maybe some sort of like gray around, like, what I'm talking about here is what about the impact on, like cortisol levels?
Yeah, exactly. And we know that there's an impact. We know that there's an increase in cortisol in at least in that study in the older population. We know that there's a decrease in insulin sensitivity.
Because I think people have talked about, like, increasing cortisol by 2.3 times.
Yeah.
Levels. Yeah. And I think this is just, it's a very small sample. Like, it was just like, there was a clinical trial where they stopped. I'm pretty sure I'm right about this, where they stopped it because there was just some concern around cardiovascular, the impact on, on the heart. I think it was concern around heart failure. That's not me saying that
No,
MK677 causes heart failure. Okay, I'm just saying there was a clinical trial where they were sort of concerned about that, and I think I mentioned this to you before, where is there some talk about impact on the brain, but I think that the impact on the brain is like if people, because this is one thing around MK677, it's just like the time that you're running it for.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got to be pretty stringent on that. Yeah. Where, isn't it, they sort of say 8 to 12 weeks. Okay. But what happens if people run it longer than that? Okay. What is the impact? Yeah.
Yeah. And, obviously, like I said, in these studies with these older people, they're doing 1 to 2 years, right? So like, that's pretty significant.
Yeah.
So, I would question if they're seeing 1 to 2 kilos of lean mass in, 1 to 2 years, what are you going to see in 8 weeks? Probably nothing overly significant. Where, if I were going to use it, and I mentioned, with TRT a moment ago, really I'd be looking at because what are the issues, right? The issues are increases in cortisol, like you just said. What's the problem with increasing cortisol? Well, this whole podcast is about body composition. And if you're increasing cortisol, we're going to increase muscle protein breakdown, right? So that's obviously going to be a concern. Now, if someone's running TRT, there's going to be a reduction in muscle protein breakdown anyway. So we're kind of negating or mitigating some of those negative effects of the cortisol. Now, we're also getting that synergistic effect of potentiating or supporting growth hormone and that potentiating the testosterone as well. And if we were going to, and, we're starting to run a polypharmacy here, but, if you had someone who's also using a GLP-1, then you're like, again, just in terms of maximizing body composition, then obviously the GLP-1 is going to mitigate some of the insulin and the metabolic issues that you would see with the MK. So I don't love that sort of path of, pulling in multiple compounds like that, but that would be the person I'd be thinking, maybe we can add in MK for periods of time. Maybe
Well, you would even like just with if you're looking at with the MK677, okay, because obviously like the stuff around reversing diet-induced protein catabolism, yeah. So what people sort of, potentially fit into that criteria was actually a lot of the stuff that, a lot of the demographic that we probably talked about, okay, like in terms of the stuff around the elderly, yeah, okay, and even like, potentially helping individuals go who are sort of like catabolic, okay, because of is a certain like acute or chronic diseases, okay, like I'm talking about catabolic conditions, yeah, okay. So my point is, okay, you would say that there's a certain demographic, there's certain types of individuals where it could be relatively interesting, yeah.
But then again, the impact around cortisol is that.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing that is interesting with the MK is it's oral. And so you're not having to inject 1 or 2 times a day. And I think that is a huge benefit for people. And I don't think it should be overlooked, but does it make it any more effective as a compound? Not really,
And I think we said in the research, okay, they were using like 25 milligrams, okay, but a lot of time recommendation is sort of like half of that, isn't it? Okay, like 12.5 milligrams.
And it's sort of, I'd say like 15 to 30 milligrams is probably where most people are going to land. Again, very selective, application, I would say. And I could probably count on one hand the amount of people I've talked to about potentially using MK.
Well, I could definitely count it on one hand, okay, because it's no people that I've used MK677 with.
So I think that's probably about it for today.
Yeah.
Where does it land us? It lands us at the most interesting peptide is the least accessible, and the least interesting peptide is the most accessible. And then the one that's kind of cost effective and mildly interesting requires 1 to 2 injections a day. So, people starting to see why I say peptides are not that interesting as far as building muscle and body composition. I just don't think they have the highest application here.
I think that's a very good point to finish on. Yeah.
I feel like we've been too liberal. At least I've been too liberal in talking about actually using peptides with myself and clients in this podcast. So hopefully we don't get like banned for recommending peptides now. Who knows? So if we're still here next week or 2 weeks from now, I hope you'll join us again. If you can't find a gut feeling in 2 weeks, then you'll know why.
You know why.
And join us for our new peptide, a peptide feeling, a new podcast, a peptide feeling, which will be
Peptidecast.
hosted on. Is Rumble still a thing?
I think so. I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you can't find a gut feeling in 2 weeks' time, check out a peptide feeling on Rumble.